Hey y'all, this is your girl Chelsea, your favorite fashion writer, reporting for duty. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I really want to get into Shein's influencer trip to China, which I hesitated to give it more airtime, but we need to talk about it. I'm sure you've been seeing it all over the news, and there's a reason why it's important to discuss it. It was problematic on so many levels, so we're going to get into why, we're going to get into the implications of it, and how in a lot of ways it's just sort of an indication of what's wrong with the entire fashion system. If this sounds good, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe so you get more content like this, and without further ado, let's get into it because there's a lot to talk about. Let me tell you what went down. Shein flew a group of mostly black and plus size, this is important, I'll get into why later, to China. It was an all expense paid, first class tickets trip, and it looks like it went on for at least 5 days from what I'm seeing. Like, I feel like at some point the girls stopped posting, maybe because of the backlash. But as they started sharing what they were up to, we realized that there was more going on. So Shein took the girls to the factories, two of them in particular, one in Guangzhou and then the other, the Shein Innovation Factory, somewhere outside of the city. They all kind of walked around. The first thing you could notice is that the factories look nothing like what you'd expect. All just really spacious, lots of light, lots of smiling, happy workers, and a lot of like robotic machines all around as if it's like really integrated with technology. And the influencers were walking around surrounded by a camera crew, which was very obvious in the way that it was captured, right? Different angles. Shein even posted some of it on their own US account on TikTok. So you can tell that this was all staged and there was like an intention to put something out there. So the influencers were seen like asking the workers questions, and they were surrounded by spokespeople too, which already tells you that like the pressure to say exactly what the company could want or could approve was there. It's hard to deny, like point blank period, right? Like if you were to say something wrong, like that mic would turn into a gun real quick because you can't say the wrong things in those things. So one influencer in particular, Danny DMC, who called herself an investigative journalist, I guess they're handing out those degrees for free these days, said that she went and talked to a woman in the fabric cutting department, asking her about her schedule and her life, and they all sort of sounded very similar. Like they said that the workers work regular hours, 8 to 6, and another one, Destiny, I think was her name, that they live 10 to 15 minutes away, just like normal. She said that the workers were really taken aback by the like child labor questions because she said, and I quote, or because they just want to be on social media, just like y'all. Okay, so already you're like, She had me when she said they weren't even sweating. Like, I was sweating. I was like, girl, BFFR. We all go watching this and we're like, no, like, this is greenwashing. There's no other way around it because here you are at that shining factory. We all know that companies have those, like, sometimes they have those, like, model factories in case there's any, like, drop visits so that they don't get in trouble, right? Shein is a massive brand that, according to one of the influencers, produce anywhere between 15 to 30,000 of clothing a day. There's no way that only one factory or even two would be responsible for the sheer volume of things that go on in there. Like, be on the website, it's an endless scroll of $3 t-shirts, $12 dresses, like you name it. All the comments were very obvious. People were quick to like get right into it because they felt like they were being greenwashed and that this whole trip was purposeful and that it wanted to counter some claims. So what are these claims, right? Shein has been accused of labor violations, things like not paying their workers the required minimum. So in Chinese local law, according to this investigation that went live on the UK Channel 4, the workers were found to be paid a little more than half of the required amount. On top of that, they were working 18-hour days. They only got 1 day off. You heard that? Like, you see how we complain about how weekends are short and we should have 4-day work weeks? They were getting 1 day off a month, okay? Completely different from what the girls are saying, that they got overtime, they're working weekends. No, 1 day a month. And they even said that their first month's wages were withheld from them, which no reason was given as far as why. It just is what it is. And in case that they make mistakes, because, you know, each one of them is like responsible for something like 500 pieces of clothing a day, they would get penalized by them taking away like a third of their pay. All of this hard evidence, right, against these influencers, the math wasn't mathing. It like something had to give. In addition to that, the brand has also been accused of having high levels of lead and other toxic chemicals in their clothing. This sends against what the influencers were saying. Two of them, one, Danny, said she was really impressed with the extensive process that each item of clothing goes through before it gets shipped off. On the TikTok account, Shein and other influencers said that they go through an extensive process for cutting, stitching, sewing, you name it. So already, who's telling the truth? I mean, this is not hard to verify information. If you put any item of Shein clothing on, especially now, it literally falls apart. Go on TikTok, see any of the Shein hauls. It looks flimsy. Like, a lot of the clothing looks super flimsy with unfinished stitches, buttons in the wrong places, just like terrible construction. It's like, what rigorous testing are we talking about? And really, is something like this possible when 15 to 30,000 of clothing a day are being produced? And then you also get just like the overall history of knocking off small designers. They've been called out a bunch of times. And then they've had problematic merchandise, like the swastika necklace in 2020. So all in all, these influencers decided to take on a big job by siding with this brand and essentially talking all of their PR points. Because as an influencer, your credibility is your currency. Your followers trust you and they literally will call you out. So the backlash was swift. Like, a lot of people were like, BFFR, which shiny factory did they take you to? Did they take you to the one, you know, like everyone just became their little detective, because it's like what we were seeing was such blatant greenwashing. It didn't make sense. A lot of people accused them of selling out, of, you know, putting a price on their morals. Like, Danny even turned off her comments, and one of the influencers is saying, like, after day 4, she told us to stay tuned for day 5. Like, there was no day 5. So it's to wonder if there was a little bit of guilt or maybe a cognitive dissonance that happened after the reaction, because there's no way that something like this could have been swept under the rug when there's obviously so much budget and so many resources put into this PR campaign. The other interesting thing too is that a lot of the influencers called it an opportunity, but you can tell this is all benefiting Shein. In a subsequent live, Danny DMC explained that they weren't paid for the trip, even though she has a partnership with Shein. They weren't paid for this one, right? So there was no monetary exchange there, which a lot of people accuse the influencers of selling out. So apparently they did all of this for free. And why is this interesting to note, right? Like, Shein posted a revenue of $23 billion last year. Despite all the negative press, despite the terrible quality, like, people are okay just spending $200, $300 at a time to do a haul on TikTok for Shein, and then replacing it another day, because there's always going to be that variety. There's always going to be that novelty. There's always going to be a little bit of everything. From that aspect, this brand will carry on being fine. But what they did in that moment was using these influencers as microphones, because they no longer have that credibility in the face of those who already don't believe it. There is hard evidence from actual investigative journalists who've gone undercover in different factories in China. And this is such a hard thing to do, because everything in China is shrouded in secrecy as far as factories. There are luxury brands also that make factory owners sign NDAs so that they never reveal that they make clothing for them. Shein is a company that is based in China, even though they've tried really hard to hide the fact. The brand even willingly said at some point they were from New Jersey, but it's not true. The brand is from China. So all this to tell you that these people have gone through the trouble of finding out that information, right? Like, it's no secret these days that they've apologized and then something else happened. There's another revelation. Like, at this point, all of the shocking exposes that exist have done nothing. They received another round of funding recently. Their valuation went down a little bit. It was 100 billion and now it's something like 66 billion. Did not change anything. Chances are Shein will continue to go on doing exactly what it's doing, not having to change anything. But the influencers, though, that credibility will be very hard to get back. I think a lot of them have time. You have time right now to go back and say, I don't know what was going on. You know, like you can take it all back. We give you a grace period, right? Within 4 or 5 business days to take it all back. So far, that hasn't happened yet. I think a lot of them have kind of gone quiet and then some of them just mysteriously stopped posting. So it's to wonder. But as an influencer, I think it's important to be able to either defend what you have to say, but to just not outright lie, right? Because like we know the truth as followers. We know the truth as consumers who find information for ourselves. We do the research, and to just see someone lying is just unacceptable. I think it would be different if the person just said, I know that Shein does all these things, but I still love it and I'm still gonna wear it, from, oh, you guys are wrong. Actually, Shein is this responsible company that pays its workers fairly, pay time off, all benefits that we would all want. I think by choosing to associate with Shein and like doubling down, which is what Shein does too, instead of, you know, going tougher on their regulations, they just double down on everything that they're doing wrong. And a lot of the influencers also did that. They kind of pigeonholed themselves, you know, like it became so public, it became so blatant that any brand looking at this, I don't see why they would choose to associate. And it would have to be a brand that's like a direct competitor of Shein, like maybe a Boohoo or like a Fashion Nova. Because if we're thinking about like tiers of brands, I think the bigger, more prestigious brands with like a better image publicly, they wouldn't want to associate. So not that I'm wishing this upon them, but from that perspective, it's almost like a career suicide. At the same time, the way outrage culture works, sometimes it's like, give it a little bit of time, maybe a few weeks or a few months, and then we'll move on. Some followers were definitely lost and will not come back. Others will be more forgiving. And in the case of Danny DMC, for example, she has management, like it's a business. She most likely will kind of carry on. I think if they own up to it, that would definitely be a better way forward. Because at least people will say, okay, yeah, I guess. But so far, this hasn't happened. On the other hand, unfortunately, like Shein will just carry on making money. Apparently, Gen Z is one of their biggest customers, which is why the brand doesn't necessarily advertise a ton. It has this free publicity from the billion of views that hashtag Shein haul has on TikTok. Like, you should just see it. The girls will have tons and tons of plastic bags that they'll take out. And what happens to these bags afterwards? Do you think they keep them? No, they throw them out. There's just nothing about the brand that's sustainable. And I'm willing to stand on that hill and say that because there are a lot of other brands that engage in similar practices. But in the case of Shein, there is hard evidence and there is no sense of taking responsibility. And that's just not something that in this current like consumer landscape is permissible. Notice also that there was no white, cis, you know, the typical blonde female consumer that a lot of brands love to represent and are currently catering to on this trip. So there were mostly Black influencers and there was the plus size influencer. And so as far as diversity, this trip completely went in that direction. It was definitely intentional. And let me tell you why. I think on one hand, it is the perception that Black or brown creators don't deserve brands that have a higher image or cater to more of kind of a luxurious customer, right? I mean, we've seen in the past how luxury brands have long ignored, say, the rapper community of the 90s or current, you know, hip-hop stars, considering their categories urban or not thinking they're their ideal target. But it's been shown that Black and brown consumers shop luxury just as much as white consumers and sometimes even more. So it's been a fight throughout, right? And maybe some brands have sort of like internalized that idea that we don't deserve nicer things, you know, like the $3, $12 t-shirts is what we gonna get. On the other hand, there are Black people who shop Shein and there are plus size people who shop Shein. So you could see it as them pandering directly to their base. Asia Barber was the one who put it best. She said that sometimes we don't have any choice but to drink the poison because we wouldn't get that opportunity otherwise. I don't like this sort of line of thinking just because it's almost like an acceptance of a sense of inferiority. I just, no. No. When brand trips are expected to be primarily white because they'll get flown to Italy, they'll get flown to, you know, Saint-Tropez or Jamaica. I mean, like, you name it. So many different exotic, beautiful locations that are like on the top of like the tourist list. You don't see a lot about people. You don't tend to see a lot of diverse people. But then, you know, you take me to some like factory tours and then I'm all up in there like, how am I supposed to feel? It's just, again, it's a manifestation of internalized biases. I'm going to sit on that hill. Some people on Instagram told me that it's not that deep, but it is that deep. You have to think about the message that it sends, right? And I don't know that the influencers considered it this way, maybe because they were already Shein fans, that to them it just felt natural. But nothing happens in isolation, and that is, you know, the insidious nature of systemic racism. So I wrote this blog post, which again is an op-ed, but a lot of people came for me in the comments, which was really interesting to think about. On one hand, you have the people who just agreed because Shein is a dub, and I will die on that hill. I will die on that hill. And on the other, you had like a troll who was trying to lash out, and I'm not doing, like, I am not the one. I will block you mercilessly. This is my digital living room, and we welcome critical thinkers and provocative dialogue over here. So on one hand, some people pointed out that other companies do the exact same thing as Shein. That's a valid point, although it's not exactly relevant to my argument since I was specifically talking about Shein and the consequences of partnering with it and the racial dimension of the trip. But, you know, I'll still hear it out. But it's no secret that a lot of companies are producing elsewhere. A lot of companies, including luxury companies that say their products are made in Italy, but really just finished in Italy, use Chinese labor. Some use Bangladeshi labor. Like, there are factories set up across usually third world countries that really could use the money, even if it's not good money, that decide to accept it. So there was a point in the 1970s where 70% of textile was produced in the US. And this is from Dana Thomas' Fashionopolis book, which is a great read just to learn about the origin of fast fashion and why we're in the system that we're in today. Eventually, though, labor costs went up. It became extremely expensive to produce in the US. And brands, being brands, instead of doing the right thing and saying, we're going to continue to make great clothes for amazing quality and people won't dump them, they decided to cut corners. And so they not only started using more synthetic fibers that were cheaper, like polyester, they also started to outsource labor in factories that don't always hold themselves to human standards. Meaning, and we all know about Rana Plaza, some of the factory owners would keep the workers, you know, slaving away in very terrible conditions in buildings that were pretty much dilapidated. There's always a conversation of how much of it is the factory's fault and how much of it is the brand. Knowing that this all goes on behind the scene and that audits always happen on dates when they know audits are going to happen, there's always going to be that conversation. But with Shein specifically, I was ready and I was comfortable going into it and calling it out specifically because it's a repeat offender that continues to double down. Another comment was people saying that, you know, Shein has plus size clothing and there's just not that many options out there. So Shein is the only option out there for you. I just, you know, I am not an expert in any way, but having read quite a bit about it, I know a lot of brands that create plus size clothing at different price points, sure, right? Like Hanifa on the one hand is Black owned, but the price points may not always be accessible for a lot of people. You also have Good Americans that has a great variety of jeans. You have brands like Eloquii, Universal Standard. There's just a lot to name, which I'll defer to you all if you have more information on that. But I just refuse to believe that Shein is the only option. It just is not. I understand that this might be where you find your size, but it's literally costing someone their wages. It's literally costing someone their best years. That conversation of just like affordability plus size, often from people in the US, come from a place of privilege anyway, because sacrifices are required in order for us to want to make a difference. And I say this as someone who is also a fashion consumer. As an influencer, my job relies on promoting products, and I love the brands that I choose to work with, and I wear the clothes because I see myself wearing them. Someone said, we should talk about the end of the influencer era. It's all a byproduct of this capitalist system that we live in. And on one hand, we love encouraging entrepreneurship, free market, and all that stuff. On the other, though, we tend to turn a blind eye to the very real systems of exploitation that support it. Luckily, there are a lot of people that I know who constantly are vocal about it. There are a lot of grassroots organizations that, go to those greenwashing conferences and just straight up call out brands. Asha Barber, for example, is a great teacher as far as what are more sustainable alternatives. Ethical consumption, is that a thing? You can make informed decisions, but at the end of the day, consuming is consuming. What makes it more layered and more complicated is that it drives the economy. I've read at different times throughout, the 70s, the 60s, post-war, for example, there were ads that were telling people to go shop, that were praising the great mall institutions of America and touting those looks, the preppy, the respectable looks. Get out there, go work, spend your money, because people weren't spending. For as long as brands have those budgets to advertise, there's a reason some spend millions a year to try to convince you that you need this dress. For as long as that's around and those companies only continue to get bigger, you're always going to face that pressure of consuming. As a fashion consumer myself, I enjoy the craft of clothes. I get excited to see new collections, to talk about trends. And there is an entire industry that is based on talking about clothes. Fashion editors do that for a job. Fashion advertisers, fashion agencies think about how to advertise clothes. There are systems built around it. And while the individual person is very powerful, and usually from us speaking up comes changes, we also should place attention ultimately on the corporations that are engaging in these practices. This is a bigger conversation that is already happening and still has yet to materialize, but I am hopeful that we will figure out a way to take back a lot of the laissez-faire that had been going on. And there lies the real issue to me. Where do we go from here? I don't know. I think as shoppers, all we can do is to continue to remain critical. People make choices based on their own personal experiences. So long as we're not engaging in greenwashing and lying, right? So it's all complicated. It's all a very layered conversation. But my point remains, Shein is wrong. It's absolutely bottom of the barrel as far as how they approach everything. And there are obvious signs to companies that are open to redemption and those that just are okay with the way things are. So I would love to hear you guys' thoughts. There is no real conclusion to this conversation. If there's anything you feel like I should expand upon, let's get into it. This is an ongoing conversation, and I will continue to educate myself and to continue to develop my critical thinking skill. And that's on all aspects, the sustainability aspects, the race aspects, the affordability aspect, because all of those things are linked and there's just no going around it. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll have a lot more of these hot button conversations happening on this channel. share this video with a friend, bring them on. Let's all, get a seat and chat it out, chop it up. I actually never talk like that, but I don't know. Feels kind of funny. So let's chop it up. With that said, I'll see you guys next time.